All right, I think we should get started. So thank you everyone for joining today. I'm really excited to have you here to speak with Josh Newton and Nikhil Deshmukh. And I'd encourage everyone to just take a second to introduce yourselves in the chats. I'm going to start off with just going over a brief agenda for the event. First, we're going to kick off with Sapir, who is from SWAN, will give us a little introduction to SWAN and the Rising Smart Water Professionals Group, as well as the definition of smart water to kind of set the foundation for today's discussion. Then I'll give a little background on why we organized this webinar. I'll have panelists introduce themselves, and then I will shoot some questions at Josh, then I'll shoot some questions at Nikhil, I'll shoot some questions at both of them, and then we will open the floor for a question and answer session. So please take advantage of the question and answer chat and the chat function. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sapir.
Thank you, Jess. So thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Sapir and I lead operations for the SWAN Forum. SWAN stands for Smart Water Networks. We are the leading global hub for the smart water and wastewater sectors, bringing together global utility solution providers and industry experts to talk about accelerating data-driven solutions in the water industry. So here's a selection of our members from around the world, but really I wanted to jump into what does smart water really mean? When you think about the water industry and utilities, you usually think about the pipes, the valves, and kind of what we call the dumb or physical layer of the water industry, how you are able to access water. But there's so much more in terms of accelerating and making us more digitally transformative in terms of the sensors, the meters, and the different technologies that can offer more insights into how we can improve and make water more efficient. So the data-driven solutions, which allow water utilities to optimize the data-less components of their operations. And as a young professional myself who was job seeking not too long ago, it was really important for me to focus on something that had a lot of impact, and clean water and sanitation for all is one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a lot of room to grow in the water industry and a lot of opportunities, and we definitely want to see how we can make it more attractive to those who are currently job seeking, but also to help those who are in the water sector find the right positions for them. We do have a global event coming up at the end of May. This is our annual conference or our flagship event. It's a week-long event bringing together over 500 participants. There will be over 45 different global utility speakers. And we're really looking forward to this event. There is a discounted rate for students, so we encourage you to check it out and hopefully you can attend. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jess, who leads this event for the Rising Smart Water Professionals.
Thanks, Sapir. Great. Well, hi everyone. My name is Jessica Ertel. As Sapir mentioned, I am part of the RiSWP leadership team, and I'm really excited to moderate this panel today because we're going to have a lot of interesting advice and ideas to share with you. And I have a feeling that this is going to be the best Zoom meeting that you've been in all day. So I currently work as a data analyst for a global research organization called the World Resources Institute, or WRI. And I'm part of WRI's forest program on a team that's focused on monitoring forest and landscape restoration. So we leverage remote sensing data and machine learning approaches to better understand global tree cover trends. And I know that sounds very smart tree and not smart water, but I'm here talking to you because I know from experience that the smart water sector is a vibrant space to start your career, where digital, and a space where digital is playing an increasingly large and exciting role. So I won't pretend to be an expert in smart water, but I've moved around quite a bit in my career, and I'm part of the RiSWP leadership team to provide a bit of an interdisciplinary flavor and network to our programming. So the panelists that I've brought to the stage today were really fundamental in helping me transition into water and tech. In 2017, I found Josh's Water Jobs, whose weekly newsletter gave me access to a consolidated list of job opportunities in a sector that I previously knew nothing about. It really helped me figure out the kinds of jobs that existed in the water sector, what companies were hiring for them, and overall, it gave me an entry point to help land a job in the water sector in another country where I had no prior experience or connections. I've job searched across a few different industries, as I mentioned, kind of within the environmental field, and I truly don't know of another newsletter of that caliber. 2 years ago, I made the commitment to pivot into the data science field because I saw that this kind of skill set was really valuable but rare. And I saw a big opportunity to have an impact on what I think are the most important problems of our time. So I graduated from a data science bootcamp in March 17th of 2020, really eager to jump into a job market that did not exist. And I began working with Nikhil and his Jobstep co-founder, Eleanor, soon after I graduated. And before the end of the year, I was able to land my first data science job. I can tell you that I would not be here today talking to you if it wasn't for the unique guidance and career support that they offered me. So I organized this webinar today with the risk leadership team and with SWAN because I wanted to share these resources with you and share this story because I think that I'm not the only one who's gone through this. Well, I know that. And I think by many indications, the job market is coming back, but youth unemployment remains high. We're about to graduate another year of students into this pandemic. And the reality is that in an economy that's recovering from major layoffs, there's a huge supply of more experienced workers looking for jobs, which makes it much harder for youth to find them. So I want to leave you with, I want you to leave this webinar with insights about hiring trends. I want you to leave it with tips for finding and applying to jobs as a young professional. And finally, a reinvigorated sense of hope that you will find opportunity that you're looking for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists for introductions. I'll start with Nikhil. So Nikhil, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Jobstep?
Sure. Hi, everyone. And thanks to Jess, Sapir, and all the organizers at SWAN and RiSWP for inviting me to speak on this panel. My name is Nikhil Deshmukh, and I'm currently based in Los Angeles, California. I am the co-founder and CTO at Jobstep, which is a B2C platform to help job seekers find work more effectively. So a little bit about Jobstep. Job seekers who work with us, they sign up for our guaranteed interview program. We match them with a coach for a 1-hour interview prep session, and then we take care of the rest. The coach writes the resume for the job seeker, and our software automatically finds and applies to high-fit roles. As a small startup with a team of 3, we're currently focused on US jobs only. And specifically, we support, customer success, and data analyst roles. But we do have plans to expand to other fast-growing roles in the technology industry. And a little bit about myself. So my journey to where I am now consists of many different career transitions. I started out studying bioengineering as an undergrad and really fell in love with basic science research. So I went on to pursue a PhD. I will admit that my decision to go to grad school was greatly influenced by my year of graduation. So I graduated in 2008 into the great financial crisis. And so my options were basically management consulting, investment banking, or grad school. And so I picked grad school. I went on to complete my PhD in neurobiology and neuroscience. And throughout my 7-year PhD journey, realized that academia was not a good fit for me. I was lucky enough to have grown up in and around Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. And so through my kind of personal network of friends and mentors, was able to land my first job at a startup doing computer vision and machine learning for automotive. So basically autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars. From there, I continued to gain skills as a data scientist, worked for a startup called Fountain, which was building software to hire hourly workers more effectively. And Fountain was the seed for my interest in the job space and hiring in general. I realized that technology is not neutral and that, making a company's hiring process more efficient actually left job seekers in the lurch. And so there were more people, who applied to the job than were able to be hired, and those folks were not even notified that they didn't get the job, and that felt wrong to me. And so, I went on to build my own data science and consulting practice and started this company to really bring the same machine learning and software that companies are using to screen people and hire people, and to make those same tools available for job seekers directly. I'm not directly in the water sector, but I think a lot of what I've learned working with job seekers does translate to this particular industry.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nikhil. And I think one of the reasons why I brought you here today with Josh is that I think there's a complementarity to the experience and advice that you can offer. So Josh, would you like to give a little introduction?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, and thank you to RiSWP and SWAN for having me here today. It's really great to chat with you all. Josh's Water Jobs was a website that I started, or my co-founder Hank and I started about almost 5 years ago now, and it's grown at a steady rate since then. Basically, we source jobs mostly in the international space, and just put them on the website. And then we have this newsletter that Jessica mentioned that goes out to a growing list of water professionals every week. And then we've all just started to grow. So we now have a few employees who will help add more services and more, say, programmatic work to our website. So very active webinars, blogs, and other resources so that we can help you all in your career search and just in career development in general. My personal background, I'm a water guy. I've been working on water since my undergraduate, almost 20 years now. And so I have the website, that's one hat, but on my water side, like Nikhil, I also have a PhD, but it's in international relations in water. I deal more with the soft sciences around water, water policy, water governance. And my niche is how countries interact with one another over water within the global space. So like the United Nations and whatnot. And right now I'm independent, and I'm also kind of looking for what's next myself. So I'm looking forward to hear what Nikhil has to say on things as well. So thank you again. I look forward to chatting with you all.
Perfect. I love when we have unexpected value adds. That's all. Great. Well, thank you both for introducing yourselves. So now I'm going to have a few questions for Josh. I think that was kind of a great foundation that you laid out for the newsletter and Josh's Water Jobs website. I'm curious to know a bit more about what gap you saw in the water sector job market that you wanted to address when you created Josh's Water Jobs. And then also, what's one of the most common questions or misconceptions that you receive?
So I kind of, in a way, backed into the website as we all, or many of us, colleagues send us job postings to spread to your network. And I started with a very small list of colleagues that I would send every job opening to. And then I started putting a list together every week. And that just grew over time until it was so big that it required basically a website. So Hank and I started the website. And why it was so attractive to people and people wanting to be on this list, and why our traffic has grown so much, is because there is no other place like this on the internet where this one community or one thematic area has a centralized place where jobs are. And I think, Jessica, you mentioned it in your intro that, yeah, I don't know too many other thematic areas that have something similar. So because of that, it's been very popular. And yeah, so in the end, the intention wasn't to fill a gap, but we found a gap, and then we're growing into it and hopefully optimizing it. And now, and speaking of in optimizing, as we look forward, the gaps we want to fill are basically there's a lot of international positions right now, but we want to increase our breadth. So that means more national level positions, but that's a huge beast. So in many jobs. So but that's in the future plans, because we want to have more on offer for people looking for jobs. It's to expand into more of the private sector. And as well, because it's a burgeoning area of the private sector, mostly is tech, data, and digital. And we're hoping to work with partners to have a dedicated space like that on the website eventually. And in terms of a misconception, I think everybody thinks that that people send me all the jobs and that I just post them. But in the end, no, I actually go and I find 95% of them myself through my own very slow search that I do every week. It's a very curated list. It's very hard, as we'll talk, I think, a little later about search terms and how to find water jobs, because if you type in water in a search engine, you get anything from lifeguard to janitor to chef. So yeah, so and that's the big misconception, I think.
Excellent, thank you. I do think one of the greatest values is that it is curated by a human who has expertise and knowledge of the water sector. So hopefully there won't be a robot that can really replace that. Great. So can you tell me a little bit about any trends that you've been seeing in the past year? So as I mentioned, and as everyone knows, the job market has changed pretty drastically. I'm curious if there's been any notable changes that you've noticed in terms of job titles, the kinds of like locations or the types of companies that have been hiring?
Yeah, I would say that, well, obviously, I think more jobs have become remote. And we'll see what happens, whether these jobs go back to being, 5 days in an office or semi-remote. But there are more, say, full-time positions that are not in the same country, not in the same state, and that may continue. So that's definitely happening. There are more, because of this how tech is exploding right now in the water sector specifically, there are more and more jobs in that space, and that's only going to continue to grow as trying to match the workforce with the availability of jobs. I think there's a whole amount of the workforce that'll need to be trained to move into these types of positions as more and more utilities and companies kind of take on this type to address their water security issues, if you will. Because of COVID, there's been a huge bump, but there's been I see a large bump in, say, WASH related research work. Obviously, WASH as a mitigating factor for COVID is very big. So I've seen a lot of academic work in that. And then also WASH jobs in particular have also, there are more of them, as that's a very important, obviously, again, to mitigate to mitigate COVID, sorry. And then I think there are, say, more international positions that are more local now. I think there's been a slight trend to hire more locally now, instead of always bringing in people from other countries. And I think that's because of kind of closed borders and stuff like that. So I think more jobs slowly are becoming more local, which has its advantages.
Very interesting. And so one of the things that I had mentioned in the introduction was that I'd actually found Josh's Water Jobs as a kind of entry point into the water sector. And plenty of people I've had a few people reach out to me with an interest in making a similar transition. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on people who are job seekers looking to transition. If I want to transition into the water sector from another discipline, what kinds of positions or organizations should I have on my radar? Or, what's your experience or read on that from Josh's Water Jobs?
Yeah, I would say there's probably more, but I would say there's probably two ways to kind of transition into, say, a new sector, if you will, or even going from two subsectors in the water space, because what training for WASH is actually very different than training for something to do with water resources management. or climate change. So I would say that one is to, and as you alluded to as well, Jessica, in the beginning, is the kind of the reskilling and upskilling. So it's really taking some time and space, whether that's why you're still working or to actually take time off to get additional training skills that would make you more competitive for the sector that you're trying to move into. And that takes, I think, just some time and patience to do that, depending on whether you have to be working at the same time or not, and just what that sector would require in terms of, if I wanted to become an engineer, I'd have to go back to school for at least 2 more years, and brush up on my math skills and stuff like that. So coming from my social sciences background. So it just depends, what you're transitioning into, and what are the skills that you need to do that. The other, and I've seen this happen as well, is more of these kind of, interdisciplinarity is more and more important now. So there are jobs out there that are more hybrid, where you may have to have a little technical expertise, but you might have to have policy expertise as well. So it's about kind of a horizontal move into a kind of similarly level position, which you have part of some of those skills that are required already. And then there might be some learning you have to do to gain the skills, but it's the organization or company are willing to give you on-the-job training or the time you need to do that with in space within the job itself. And most of in terms of another way to kind of transition this is kind of through mentors. There is the traditional type of mentor, I think, where you talk to a senior person, they can facilitate things, but there's also these, I would say it's the peer-to-peer mentoring, these associations like RiSWP, like SWAN, like the Water Youth Network, the World Youth Parliament for Water, where you have different people from different parts of the water sector that you can learn from, that you can engage with, who can open doors for you. And I think that's a big way to kind of create more opportunities and gain more knowledge in whatever kind of move you're trying to make into the new sector. And that's for someone coming from outside the water sector or someone within the water sector looking to move to a new area.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, I have definitely interviewed more people to find a job than people have interviewed me for a job. So those kinds of networks are so super valuable, and great opportunity to plug the work that we're doing with RiSWP and with SWAN. We're actually going to have a special guest join us a little bit later to give a really good example of how valuable those networks are. So thank you for saying that. I'm going to move over to Nikhil now and shoot a few questions his way. So Nikhil, I'd like to talk about tips for networking, applying to jobs, interviewing. Through your experience with Jobstep, what have you learned about how employers screen and find applicants? And what are some of the common misperceptions about the hiring process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So over the last 40 years, and I will caveat this by saying a lot of what I'm talking about is what I know from the US job market. So I don't know how well this translates to kind of the global market. But the median time between jobs in the US has increased from 3 months to 6.5 months. And the reason for this is, back in the day, you would apply for a job by showing up at the employer or submitting a paper resume. And the number of applications that the companies have to process was, maybe 10 or 15. Now, for an entry-level position in technology, companies will receive between 400 to 800 applications for a single spot. And so the only way that they're able to deal with this volume of application is to use some technology to start screening out some of the applicants. And so, if you look at a typical hiring process, from 400 to 800 people who apply, they will maybe interview, if they have the time, they'll interview 20 to 40 people. So that's 2 to 10% of applicants. And so this is consistent with what we see with our job seekers, where we're applying for thousands and thousands of jobs, and we see that on average, for every 100 applications we send out, we get about 10 requests for interviews. So that's like a 10% rate. And so to do the math, if you do the math, then that means that you need to apply for between 5 and 20 jobs to get one interview. For every interview you get, only a few of them will lead to an offer. So on average, we're seeing that job seekers need to apply to around 100 jobs to get an offer. Now that may seem dire, but there is good news, which is if you network and can find someone at the company who can put in a warm referral for you or recommend you or put you in touch with the hiring manager, your chances go up dramatically. So we also found that having a warm referral improved your chances of getting an interview 7 times. So it is really important to try to find someone human in the hiring process who can help you kind of navigate internally at the company and put in a good word for you. At the same time, a lot of people don't have a strong network to begin with. It's pretty difficult to establish a network from scratch. And so the kind of brute force approach of applying to many, many jobs will also work. So I can tell you that, I myself have found a job just applying to as many as possible. And I know Jessica as well has had success using that approach. And we've both had success using kind of a networking-based approach. Yeah, that's kind of the way employers are using technology now, and some ways that you can kind of set yourself up for success. I think a lot of job seekers underestimate how much work it is to find a job.
Yeah, that is definitely true. So I want to talk a little bit more about leveraging the network, because like you said, having the warm referral can really increase your chances. That is really hard right now with everything being super virtual. There's no, networking events you can go to in person. It all has to be pretty, outreach virtually on LinkedIn, email, phone calls. So do you have any tips, or what are your tips for leveraging a virtual network? And how can job seekers really build better connections that will get them that warm referral?
It's a skill, right? And I think, like any skill, networking takes practice. And so, the answer is to do it more often and to practice. And I think one tip for networking is people are generally generous and willing to give help, but they also don't like to be, they don't like it to feel like a transaction. So I think a lot of people make a mistake where they come on too strong at the beginning and they ask too much too soon. So if you're cold contacting someone on LinkedIn or via email and you want to, understand more about their job and have them ultimately refer you or help you out, it can often be helpful to frame that not as a, hi, here I am, please help me, but rather to frame it as, hey, this is who I am. I'm curious about learning more about you, about learning about your journey, and making the interaction about them. And I think that framing often leads to better responses from other people to get them to help you out and to network with you. Tactically, LinkedIn is a really great tool to use. Often when you apply to a job, you can go on LinkedIn and find individuals at the organization where you've applied to, and find their email address. And so when you apply to a job online to this, nameless, faceless web application portal, you often don't know or never hear back, or you get a robotic confirmation email. You will drastically improve your chances if you send the application and then follow it up with an email that same day or the next day saying, oh, hi, my name is Nikhil. I've applied for this position at your company. I'm really excited about it. Would love to chat with you about your experience working at so-and-so organization, right? And just by sending that email follow-up, you can, drastically improve your response rates.
Yes, I can definitely vouch for that. Great. So kind of similar to what I asked Josh, I'm curious about touching on this element of transitioning into a new field. I think one of the most popular questions that I receive, having kind of done this data science pivot, is people that are looking to do kind of a similar move or pick up kind of upskill, pick up some programming skills, kind of make that transition into the tech sector as these skills become more and more sought after. So what advice would you give job seekers that are kind of in the middle of a career transition during this time? And have there been any successful strategies that you've noticed with the job seekers that you work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, personally, I also went through that transition. I realized year 4 out of 7 of my PhD that I didn't want to do academia anymore. And so I had 3 years left. Well, I didn't know I had 3 years left, but I knew I had time left. And I was at a world-class research institution with a bunch of resources. And so, I signed up for courses in machine learning. I signed up for a course in high-tech entrepreneurship. And I really utilized the resources at my institution. So for those of you in master's programs or PhD programs who are thinking about maybe, transitioning or doing something not academic in the future, use your institution. Often you will find groups of like-minded individuals, other students who are thinking about, alternate career paths, use the classes and extracurriculars to your advantage. The other tip around transitioning is around skills. So I think I get a lot of questions around, oh, what skills are valuable? Should I learn Python or R? I think we did some analysis of this, and it turns out that the one skill I would recommend for everyone across the board, regardless of what you're trying to do, is not Python or R, it's SQL. So SQL is structured query language. It is a way to interact with databases. And in the US, a person who knows SQL will make $7,000 more per year for the same job than someone who doesn't know SQL. And this is true for people who aren't working in technical positions. So people who are on the business side, financial analysts, business analysts, data analysts, as well as data scientists. I mean, data scientists work with SQL all the time. So if I had to pick one skill, it would be SQL.
That's fascinating. I'm really happy you shared that statistic. I didn't know that. And yeah, I guess if I would add my tidbit of advice, every single person that I called for an informational interview, I asked them what skills they would look for in a candidate. And after a while, I had a pretty long list, but you can also start to see these are people in hiring positions, and these are the kind of skills that they're looking for in their candidates that they're interviewing. So that kind of helped me narrow down the list a bit. But yeah, really interesting. So thanks, Nikhil. All right, so I think you touched a bit on entering the workforce after you completed your PhD. I know that there's probably a lot of people on this call that are maybe in a similar position. They either graduated last year into COVID, or maybe they're upcoming to graduation. Do you have any other tips for addressing gaps in experience for those who've been job seeking for a prolonged period of time, or people who are maybe considering going back into academia, kind of similar to the struggle that you dealt with when you graduated?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one, and we see this with a lot of people. It's a very common experience to be like, oh, I took time off that's not related to what I want to do, or I have a gap, or I don't have a skill. And this is it's kind of a game. There's an aspect of gamesmanship here where the goal is to market yourself and to really take stock of the skills that you do have. And I often find it's helpful to talk to people who are close to you in your life and have them kind of help you make a list of what you can do, because often you're too close to yourself to really appreciate all the things you can do, right? And so have a partner or a friend or family member sit down and write down a list of what you can do. I think the other tip I would have there is find a way to quantify the impact that you had, or the scale of the work that you did. Especially for industry jobs, I think, translate that to a one-page resume, and really sell yourself. A one-page resume is a marketing document, right? So one example I can give, as a PhD student in a biomedical research lab, I did a lot of grunt work. I did a lot of bench science, but I also did a lot of lab management. So I was the one who was ordering supplies for the lab. I was the one who was, scheduling the microscope, scheduling the electrophysiology rig, et cetera, right? And so, on my resume, I don't say I was the grad student who made the lab run smoothly. What I say is, managed operations, supplies, inventory, scheduling, equipment for a $2.5 million neuroscience research program at blank university, right? And so it's literally the same experience. It doesn't feel like you did a lot, right? But it's actually, something where an employer can see like, oh, I can trust this person to do similar things for my company, right? So I think that's really the game, is to show the employer what you can do for their organization.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Nikhil. All right, so now I'd like to move to the next kind of session, which will be questions for both Josh and Nikhil. We're also going to introduce our special guest right now. So he's a member of the RiSWP leadership team. Muhandan, would you like to join us? I invited Muhandan because I think he's an excellent example of exactly what I was saying earlier. Someone who leveraged the SWAN network to land a job. And I'd really like to hear a little bit from Muhandan about his experience, what kind of strategies enabled him to successfully get this position, and how did you leverage the SWAN network to get there?
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, you're right. I was one of the few lucky guys who was able to leverage the SWAN team and the RiSWP team's network, and was able to get a job right in the middle of a pandemic. So let me introduce myself. I'm Mukundan, and I'm a water engineer with Jacobs Engineering, and I'm part of their digital water team. So I'm also a leadership member of the SWAN RiSWP team. I'm here to share my experience and give my thoughts and help out you guys with any questions you have. So to give a little bit of background, I'm a master's graduate from NC State University in the US, North Carolina State University in the US, with my master's in environmental engineering and a little bit of statistics and analytics. Here, I'd like to, support what Nikhil said, in that I was able to use the availability of coursework in my university, not just in civil or environmental engineering, but also with respect to analytics, time series, and statistics, where I also had interest, so that I could kind of market myself as someone who knows both. So let me share my experience here. Right before the pandemic, my entire job seeking strategy was a little bit different, wherein I attended a lot of in-person networking events. I was part of quite a few engineering associations here in the US, called American Waterworks Association, American Society of Civil Engineers, etc., etc. These events helped me a lot, in connecting with the engineering network in my local town. For example, I was from Raleigh in North Carolina, and I was able to connect to a lot of engineers in that city. But pandemic struck, and the job market took a toll, and I was kind of confused on how to modify my strategy, or how to proceed further to keep searching for jobs when all the in-person networks, conferences got cancelled. So at that time, I kind of figured out that not just job seekers, but engineers and managers as well were all a little bit more virtually present than physical, since that was the only option. So I kind of figured that online events, online conferences, LinkedIn were the way to go. And right at that time, SWAN's 2020 conference became virtual, and before which it was scheduled to be held at Glasgow. Since it turned virtual, I was able to help out the team with a lot of organizing, and that kind of put my name in the front with the Smart Water Network that's present there. And that kind of using virtual tools or LinkedIn network or your online networking events through SWAN or any other water association was kind of the way to go. So from then on, I helped with organizing the SWAN conference, connected with a lot of engineers through SWAN network on information interviews. And these information interviews were a key part of my job search, where I was able to, like Nikhil said, I was able to not just, go in with the motive of looking for jobs, but to know more about their company, their projects, and what kind of skills that they use in a daily basis, and what kind of skills that they would like an entry-level engineer to have when they're starting their job. So informational interviews kind of took my job search a long way. And apart from that, networking through SWAN and tapping into my graduate school alumni, my professors were able to help me out with connecting with their students who had graduated a few years before me and who are in the industry, and they in turn were able to connect me with other folks in the industry. So I would kind of say it essentially is how well you are able to build your network and how well you're able to get help when you need it. It would be better if it's not something direct, going cold messaging just for a job. If you're able to kind of build relationships with engineers and managers in your local area or all across your country, if you're able to build those relationships, and if you're able to provide as well as ask for help, I think it can take a job search a long way. Finally, if I can put it simply, a good solid network like the SWAN network, and attending online conferences or in-person conferences, whichever works based on the current situation, and having a lot of friends close together, like-minded people who are either studying or about to graduate or looking for jobs or just found a job close to you, and being able to talk to them on a regular basis will kind of help you as a candidate go a long way in the job search process.
Thank you so much for sharing, Hunton. Yeah, I think you're an excellent example of someone who really kind of went out there and put a lot of effort into the job search, but in all the right ways. Like, I think building relationships and joining communities is not only good for networking, but it's also really positive reinforcement for the days when you're experiencing job search burnout. It's really important that you're connected with like-minded people and people that inspire you to kind of push you to keep going. So thank you for sharing that. I think we have time for maybe one joint question, and then we'll open the floor to question and answers from the audience, because I see we have quite a few. I really love the fact that we kind of have these two ways of finding jobs. So Josh, you spoke a little bit about this. There's very specific search terms that you use to come up with a curated job list that you send out each week. I want to hear a little bit more about that process that you use to find jobs, whether there's specific search terms that our audience might benefit from using. And then also a little bit from Nikhil's side in terms of like how you're automating that. And maybe search engines, whether there's search engines that are better than others. Maybe you could both speak to your process there. I'll let Josh start.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, so this is more in if you're using big search engines, say an Indeed or even like, I don't know, Idealist or a DevX, which have, well, Indeed has hundreds of thousands of jobs, but even a DevX has, say, 6,000, 7,000, development-oriented jobs. And the key for me and how I narrow it down is to use, two-word combinations at least in quotations, so it has to find the exact term. Because if you just type in water, if you just type in smart, if you just type in engineering, you get all sorts of things you don't want. So I have a set of, say, I think it's between 10 and 15 different search terms that are word combinations. So it's water resources, water resource, water governance, water policy, environmental policy, natural resource management, all in quotations. So it finds that exact term. And then you can add, some of these have very advanced searches, so you can add one term. So you can use climate change, and then I would add the word water to that, and through that you narrow the jobs down quite quickly. And Indeed, it's from thousands to just maybe a few hundred or a few dozen. So it's those word combinations that really are key for me, and when I'm looking for jobs to populate the website.
Yeah, that's an awesome strategy, Josh. To add to what you're saying, I think, yes, exact keyword matches are key. Some of the big search engines like Google and DuckDuckGo will index job listings from different companies and things. So you can use Google, type in the keyword, but then you can limit it to specific sites. So in the tech industry, there are two application tracking systems. One is called Lever, and the other is called Greenhouse. And so if you limit your search results to, site jobs.lever.co or site boards.greenhouse.io, that allows you to target, not just the specific keywords, but also it enriches for, smaller companies, startup type jobs that tend to use these particular application tracking systems. The other advantage to Greenhouse and Lever is that their forms to fill out for the applications are much simpler and much shorter than some of the forms you'll see on other company sites. And so those are the two that we like to use because we're mostly focused on tech industry jobs. And in fact, the approach that Josh was saying using specific keywords is exactly how we do a lot of our automated job search under the hood.
Awesome. That's really great. Thanks for sharing your secret sauce, both of you. All right, so I'd like to open up to Q&A because we have a ton of really great questions coming in. So the first one I have is about how international research networks can work within and for communities to deliver water-related solutions. What are the ways we can, early in our careers, position ourselves to work on projects that will outlive the grant money and funding cycles? So I feel like maybe Josh should take that one.
Okay, very specific. Geez. Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer to that off the top of my head.
Maybe perhaps like more generally, thinking about like how, like, I don't know, the way that I interpret this question is like positioning myself early on in my career to kind of be able to like market my skills to work on these projects. I'm kind of taking out the grant money funding cycle element, but I'm thinking about how in the job search, I had to like do a couple of passion projects that I was really excited about, but also showed marketable skills so that I could kind of talk about those to employers, but I was still able to do it in a way that was like kind of bringing fulfillment to me, and maybe it's aligned with the studies or kind of an academic career. I don't know, that's how I would immediately be thinking about it.
Yeah, I think there's other ways I guess you can look at it too. Like, I mean, it's about basically it's like getting a foot in the door so you can be wherever it is you're working long term. And I think there's a few ways to do this. And whether this is a research project or just a job at a company or United Nations, and it's getting the foot in the door. And sometimes that's through an internship, where you can start working for an organization, company, whatever, show your value, and then that opens the door for longer term employment later on. Same thing, a similar thing, especially with international organizations, is through short-term consultancies, where you can get, especially for junior people, these are ways to get in the door to organizations that are hard to get permanent jobs in, where it's like a 2-month, 3-month, 6-month, almost whatever you can get. These are often through connections and networking. And again, it's getting in the door, showing what you can do, showing how you add value. And then they're like, okay, we're going to make a space for you in this company, organization, because we see how valuable you are to us. And that creates then the long-term path, or the way forward rather, for staying on a research project or in a company in a long-term position.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, I'm going to combine a few questions that I'm seeing kind of related to the point that Nikhil made about SQL. So we have, do I need to go back to school to learn SQL? Some computer programs are only available for institutions. And then also there's kind of a question that's like, I learned Stata in undergrad, but I haven't used it in a while. How can I effectively market this skill? And, maybe kind of keep my skills fresh. So do you have any tips on that front, Nikhil?
Yeah, sure. So I will clarify, SQL is kind of an open source programming language. There are many free courses online that I have found to be very valuable. Personally, I didn't take a class at an institution to learn SQL. I learned it on the job and by Googling stuff on Stack Overflow whenever I ran into issues, and through some of these online resources. So I'll follow up with Jessica and share 1 or 2 of these courses for you all to look at. I think, yeah, and what was the second half of the question?
It was kind of about keeping skills fresh, and how, if you've learned Stata, for example, in your undergraduate degree, can you still market it? Maybe like how would you put it on your resume and feel like kind of confident speaking about it in an interview? I think that's one that I definitely ran into, and I put all my data science stuff on my resume.
Yeah, that's a very common kind of story that I hear as well, is people feel like, oh, I want to put all these skills that I have on my resume, but I'm not sure if I can, like I'm not good at this thing anymore, or I learned Spanish in high school, but my Spanish is not great. Should I list it? Generally, and again, going back to the resume as a marketing document, I would list it for jobs where it is appropriate. Part of the gamesmanship of applying to jobs is, tweaking or customizing your resume for a particular job opening. So I would list skills that are relevant to that particular job. Even if it's not fresh, if it's relevant to that job, the fact that you're familiar with it separates you from candidates who have no familiarity with it. So I would absolutely list something like Stata if there's a job that uses Stata. If the job doesn't use Stata, you can feel free to leave it off. So that's kind of how I would answer that question. I think if you're worried about, oh, it's not fresh in my mind, I generally say, don't go back to school or take a course or something, or do a boot camp unless it's like absolutely essential. There are so many free and open tools online, Khan Academy, Coursera, Udacity. They're really great kind of online open classrooms for learning. And these resources are widely available and pretty high quality now. So for any of these like hard skills that you need a refresher, I would take an online class to refresh yourself before the interview.
Great advice, and I appreciate the distinction as well for what goes in the resume and what doesn't. I think that's very clear. All right, I love this one. Stats show that women tend to apply to Stats show that women tend to apply less to upper level jobs than men because they think they're not prepared. Do you think it's wise and good to apply for jobs that might seem above our experience level in terms of years of expertise? I'll kind of leave it open. Josh, I know you also kind of distinguish in your newsletter years of experience. So I'm curious how you'd approach that, and Nikhil, you can also weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I say I mean, it's about how much time you want to spend, and whether you open yourself up to applying to jobs that are, say, above the number of years experience. I would say go for it. I've definitely heard stories where people don't have the number of years experience, but they were hired for positions. So because I think people go up and they go down when they look. So if they have 5 years experience, they're looking at jobs that have 3 years experience, but they're also required, and they're also looking at ones that have 7. And so it's about, how much time you want to spend into, the breadth of jobs that you want to spend applying to, because, and Nikhil was saying you have to maybe apply up to 100 jobs. So it's about picking and choosing, and where your skills match, because it could be that, there's a job that requires 5 years experience, that you have five years experience, but it's a little off from your skill set. It may require 7 years experience, but you're spot on for it. And so you may want to give that a try. So I'd say it's putting yourself out there and then selling yourself really well, marketing yourself really well about your fit for that job.
I think that's spot on, Josh. That's exactly right. And I think you make a really great point to distinguish between years of experience and then the skills listed. And one thing I will mention about the list of skills, when you see a job description, that list of skills is like the unicorn perfect candidate for that job. I guarantee you that whoever they hire does not actually meet that checklist of skills. As a hiring manager myself, I've hired people, with maybe half of the skills that are listed on the job description. So the general rule that I like to tell people is if you meet 50 to 70% or more than, depending on the job. If it's an entry-level job, if you meet 50% of the requirements, apply. If it's a job with, three or more years of experience, if you meet 70% of the bullet points in the job description, then you should apply. But absolutely do not disqualify yourself from a job just because of like 1 or 2 bullet points on a job description. And that's true for education as well. So I've seen jobs that are like PhD required and they'll hire someone with a bachelor's degree or master's degree. So please just, put your hat in the ring and see how it goes.
So I also see a question that's kind of related, and maybe Josh, you can speak to this since you're focused on kind of the international water community. what would you do what would you say if you have a lot of experience in maybe your home country? Do you have any tips for like how you can kind of communicate that effectively for needing experience in another country? Or like, what are the challenges that might come up with that?
Yeah, this is a good question. I'm actually helping a friend with this right now who has a load of US experience but wants to work internationally. And it's a really tough sell, just to be honest, because those people you're competing with, many of them will have a lot of international experience. And that's often what is really looked for, say, if in an international setting. There's a couple ways you can, it's highlighting any kind of multicultural experience that you have, any type of work that you've done in your job that is international. It's taking more of maybe a multi-step approach to it, where like right now, like the friend I'm working with can't move abroad for 5 years, but can change jobs now. So it's about getting a job based in the US that has international elements to it to be able to make her a better sell for when she does apply for a purely international job later. So it takes more time, but often you are going to be competing with people who have like lots of, maybe even just international experience. It takes a time as well, but highlighting if you speak multiple languages always is really valuable. That it makes you more competitive for positions. If you speak 1 or 2 or more other languages and your competition doesn't. Also, that shows that you have an international perspective on the world if you speak multiple languages. So it's just a few things, but yeah, it's trying to get either getting some experience internationally or highlighting whatever you do to like a significant extent when trying to make that transition to international.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been my experience in working abroad and kind of switching between the US and other contexts. And I also think that now more than like ever before, you can work abroad without being abroad. So you can join these kinds of networks, you can volunteer your time, you can get international experience without actually physically being anywhere else except for your home country. So that could be a great way to kind of build your resume in that area. All right, next question. I'm going to modify it a little bit because I think it's a good one, but I'm gonna tailor it to what I think Nikhil maybe could speak to based on my experience working with him, which is the trend in many hiring companies is kind of work experience. So how can you go beyond that to show skills like adaptability of an individual? Or maybe some of the kind of soft skills that don't always communicate themselves on a resume so clearly.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I saw another question about academic experience versus work experience. So I'll try to bring that in. I think, academic research experience absolutely counts as work experience. And it's one way to demonstrate that you have a lot of these skills. Adaptability, soft skills like that, I think that's part of the narrative. So when you're marketing yourself in a resume, you often want to show that your career has some kind of story or arc to it, where you start off as someone learning, and you get degrees, and you gain skills and institutional knowledge, and you learn how to do research, or you learn how to do policy or analysis, right? And then as your career progresses, it's kind of showing this progression from someone who has a bunch of skills to someone who's starting to apply them, and building a story around, I went from, my first job to my second job where I worked on this particular field. And then I moved horizontally and worked on the same field in a different context, and kind of telling those stories. And so I think implicit in the resume, in this marketing document, is this narrative. And I think that's where these soft skills can really shine. I don't think it makes sense to like list them as a bullet point, right? But it does make sense to write what you're doing, to show that you're adaptable, right? To show that you're able to take an experience from one context and do it in a different context, right? Or to say, I worked on, somebody mentioned AI, ML. If you're working on like computer vision and neural networks for robotics, you can do computer vision and neural networks for smart water, right? And to show that you can adapt your skills to a new context, right? And so, yeah, I guess to summarize, it's kind of like show, don't tell through kind of the narrative of your resume.
Awesome. I love this one. I know this might sound a bit aloof, but do I, as an entry-level water engineer, know what I really want? I like this. All right, I'll finish the whole question, but I also want to speak to this a little bit. Having worked on AI ML for improving program efficiencies in the water industry, I get reviews that I come across as a data analyst rather than a water engineer. Water managers in my network say smart water is still a fairly young field, and it is not so good to look for a role in such a niche field, but get your foot in the door. What's your take on this?
Me?
Well,
yeah, I think there are, I mean, you can use this for any job in any area. It's whether you aim immediately for your dream job, or you take incremental steps to get to your dream job. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to approach this. I think you should, always shoot for the jobs that you think are your exact, best fit for, no matter what anybody else is telling you. I still do that now, and I'm 20 years into my career. But it's shooting for that, but also being willing to, if things aren't working out, to be able to use the more incremental step. What I noticed coming out of graduate school so I went to School of International Affairs. So my friends are doing all sorts of different things with international affairs. What I saw that from most of them coming out, that it took like one or two jobs. It was like they'd get one job right out of school, then make a horizontal move, and then a vertical move, and then another horizontal move before they hit spot on exactly what they wanted to be doing. So, and that varies. I mean, some people got it immediately, some people just took more time. So I think it's always still, I think, aiming for that job that you really want to do, but being willing to be patient and making these more incremental steps to get to that dream job. There's no right or wrong way to do it, I think. I mean,
I guess I would add, like, I always felt like people that knew exactly what they wanted to do were probably wrong, because it's so hard to know what's out there before you've been out there. So I think if you're kind of questioning whether you know what you really want, the best thing that you can do is try a couple of things. And I do feel like, at least in my career journey, having tried working across several different sectors, in the nonprofit side and private sector, I slowly started to get a really, really good sense of what I wanted. And I was able to go after that and know, like, have a very clear value proposition and add when I was interviewing. So I guess my suggestion would be experiment and try a couple of things. And like Nikhil kind of mentioned, talk to a lot of people, because as you talk to people, things will start to stand out to you and you'll be able to relate to them. And then you'll realize, like, oh, that's actually what I want to do, or I like that as well. And it really helps you kind of build your story. So that would be my suggestion if you're kind of questioning yourself.
I just want to add one thing to that, and it's working off exactly what you said, Jessica, is in the experimentation, is use internships to try out things that you think you want to do. So you have multiple opportunities during an undergrad and even your graduate school work, if you're doing that, to do 3-4 month internships in summers, in J-term, and it's a way to try out to see if that's what you want. So I always tell people, like, there's a lot of people, it's their dream job to work in the UN. I want to work in the UN. Then people get in the UN, they're like, wow, this is not what I want. It's actually horrible to work in the United Nations. But the best way to see that ahead of time is to do an internship, and then you try it out. And it's actually just as valuable to eliminate from your list the things you want to do than to find out what you want to do.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I think one thing on top of that is, once you've experimented and you have an idea what you want to do, if it doesn't exist, create it for yourself, right? And this doesn't have to be, starting a company, right? It can be negotiating a position and, like, writing your own job description within a company. I know a lot of people in my network have had that experience where they're like, we want to hire you for your skills. Like, let's figure out what your role is. And so I think that's kind of the flip side. Once you've done your experimenting and you've landed on, like, I want to do AI ML for water, right? And there aren't that many jobs out there. I think it's, it's up to you to kind of create that. And then also in terms of, for me, why startups? I think somebody asked a question earlier about funding cycles and project cycles, and having been in academia with like 6% grant funding pay lines, like, it's just a very small pie to chase. And I will say that in the private world, in VC venture capital, there's more money, per idea, and so it can often be a way for you to do exactly what you want to do, to, like, spin out a company and kind of pursue that path.
Great, thank you, Nikhil. Yeah, I think Josh and I were nodding pretty excitedly at some of those points. So unfortunately, I have to bring a close to this conversation. It's been great. I could keep going probably for another hour, but I know our European attendees would not be very happy with that. And the rest of the world would not be very happy to stay up late. So I would like to just add, thank you, everyone. We're going to see, I'll see if we can maybe answer a couple of these questions and circulate them after the webinar. So thank you so much for your engagement. It's been really great, and it's made this conversation really valuable. So I'll just ask Sapir if she can put up the final slides. I have a few announcements to share and opportunities to stay engaged. Maybe try sharing one more time. There we go. All right, great. So the first opportunity I just want to highlight, RiSWP has a LinkedIn group, so we'd love for you to join. We post jobs pretty regularly, hackathons, general ways to get involved in the water community. So we'd welcome you to join the LinkedIn group. Feel free to post, introduce yourself. It's a really great way to get to know people. I also just started, thanks to Sapir for really supporting this, we put up a career resources page. I think there was some discussion in the chat about it earlier. It has links to Josh Sweater Jobs and Jobstep. Jobstep has a freely accessible course you can take about how to land a job during COVID. So there's some really great tips in there that build on some of the things that Nikhil mentioned today. There's also a couple of different courses and interesting webinars that are all related to the job search. You can also, there's also a form. If you have resources that you'd like to share, you can submit them and we'll try to post them. So please take advantage of this page and contribute to it. We'd love to have your feedback. Next slide. The next event that we have coming up is our mentorship series. So Rudy on the leadership team has been doing a great job with this. It's a really awesome opportunity to access mentors. It's different from this event in that everyone can kind of participate, raise their hand, throw out some questions whenever they want. And Ricardo is an incredible person. So if you are interested in entering the smart water field, he has some really great insights and a really interesting story. So I'd highly suggest that you join on April 21st. And then I'm really excited to announce that we just launched our first ambassador program. It's composed of 8 women, 8 men, 12 different countries, all with a variety of different expertise levels and backgrounds. And the RiSWP ambassadors are going to be supporting our leadership team. We had 2 awesome ambassadors helping out today with questions and chats. So I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to have their support today. But this group is really going to be amplifying our global reach, engaging a wider community of young professionals, and they're all around us really awesome. I was blown away by their background and their stories. So you can connect with them on our LinkedIn page if you're interested, but we'll probably have a lot more programming coming out soon. And that's it. So just one moment to give a special thank you to the SWAN for helping to coordinate this event. It was a lot of work behind the scenes, and I'm really, really appreciative for their help. This idea and the idea to bring Josh and Nikhil together was one that's kind of been festering for a few months. I'm really, really grateful to you, Nikhil and Josh, for offering your time today. We had such a great turnout, and it's been really awesome to have you both here. So thank you so much. And then finally to the leadership team for all of your support in helping me pull this idea together into an actual webinar layout and kind of giving me encouragement and support to keep organizing it. And then finally to the 2 ambassadors who supported in the back end today. Thank you so much. So have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you. Well done.
We included the link to the feedback survey in the chat. So if you're interested in sharing your feedback on how this event went or any ideas for future events, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you to help our programming. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next event, and thank you, everyone.